Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Deen One Podcast. My name is Martasim Ibrahim, your host and your moderator for today's podcast. With me, I have two brothers, Hayyan and Hudayfa Khan, both college students. Hayyan Khan is a mechanical engineering student at Central Michigan University, and Hudayfa Khan is a biomed engineering student at the University of Illinois at Chicago, same university that I go to. With us, we also have Brother Abdullah. Brother Abdullah is a graduate of computer science at UIC as well. So we have three UIC, students / alumni here. Assalamu alaikum to you all. How are you guys doing?
Walaikum
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Good to have you guys.
Alhamdulillah, Jamal. How about you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good. So inshallah today, we're going to be discussing something that's on the minds of a lot of Muslims and a lot of people living in America. And the thing that we're going to discuss inshallah is the upcoming elections. Now, as Muslims in the Muslim community, a lot of the times we're told to align ourselves with a specific party. To be more specific, we're told to align ourselves with, example, the Democratic Party, right? So there's a lot of pressure to tell the Muslim community to go out and vote. Especially I think you guys kind of recognize this, is that, this time around voting season, we see a lot of ads when it comes to voting. We see ads on social media. We see, people who are very well known in social media, like basketball athletes, football athletes, telling people to vote. And it's never been like this before. If you look at the past presidential, elections and stuff like that, there has never been such a big push to tell people to vote. And a lot of notable people in the Muslim community have also been telling, the Muslim community to vote. So inshallah, we're going to discuss voting. We're going to be answering questions such as what is voting? Is voting the only way to change? We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, inshallah. So before we even go into the halal, haram aspects of voting and if we're allowed to do it, if we're not allowed to do it, we want to come to an understanding of what voting is first, right? So Hudayfa, I want to kind of direct this question to you and ask you and just kind of give us a little background of how does the voting process in a democracy actually work? Hudayfa, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Martasim. To get into how the voting process works and what the vote actually means, you got to understand how the democratic system in America really works. And America is not really a true democracy like you have in some parts of Europe. It's more indirect. It's not just a majority has the power. And actually, the founding fathers of the United States were against. They thought the majority could easily, take control of the nation, and they didn't want that. And America can really be more accurately described as a republic, where representatives are these elected officials. They represent the citizens of the United States, and so you as a citizen, you're voting to elect officials, elect these politicians who go out and represent you in Congress and whatnot. So when you're putting your vote in for a politician, you're giving them the right to legislate on behalf of you. It's impractical to have, America's population is almost 330 million. It's impractical to have all of them vote and vote on each law, each bill that's passed. Therefore, you have these representatives who are going to go out and do for you. Now, this, we'll get into why this might be considered wrong through the Islamic perspective. But let's what the vote really means. Now, because they're representing you, citizen, every action they carry out, or not every action, but every law they vote for, every bill they stand behind, every policy they advocate for, is as if you, the voter, has also stood behind these. Behind the politicians' policies, because you gave them the power, you elected them be in that position to represent you. Now, so I hope that you guys are able to follow that. Now, there's something additionally added onto America's democratic system, and with the elections coming up, you got to understand what the electoral college is. Now, as I said before, America is not a true democracy. The citizens are not directly controlling what goes on into the in the government. So the Electoral College that actually serves as a formal committee that's elect the president. So when you the citizen go out and vote for the election right prior to November, you're actually voting for a number of electors who then are in early December go to formally vote for the president. So I'll use Illinois as well. Illinois has 20 electoral votes. Now this is the nation as a whole has 538, and each state has a different number for like their population size. So now suppose the Democratic nominee Joe Biden this year wins the popular vote in Illinois, so most of the citizens are going to vote for the Democratic Party. In this case, 20 electors, Democratic electors, close colleagues of Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, they in early December are going to formally vote for the president. Now, usually the case is where all 20 of them do end up voting for the party they align with, but they actually don't have to. And there actually have been instances in the past where they overturned their pledge. So hopefully that kind of gives us a better understanding how the democratic system and voting really works in the United States.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. That does open up a lot of, there's a lot of things there that, even I didn't know when it comes to electoral college. So we're going to kind of transition into a different question and a different aspect of, what we see a lot of the times in social media and, on TV. A lot of the times we're told that our vote counts. You and I and every single person that goes and votes, every single one of those votes counts. Let's just watch this video really quick that talks about, our voting counts, and then inshallah we can go into a discussion.
Why should we vote? Well, we should vote because it's important for community. It's also important that we exercise our right as citizens of this country, and every vote counts.
I vote on the issues that are important to me. Civil rights, immigration,
healthcare and education,
equality, the environment,
community,
and taxes are very important,
immigration,
and the economy.
So there you go. That was a video. You hear a lot of people talking about, they vote for things that they are passionate for. Things about, for example, economy, immigration, the list goes on and on. So, the question that I want to ask Hayan is that when we vote and we vote to try to change these types of things, does our vote actually count?
Right. That's a great question. Before I go on, I just want to make sure, can you hear me pretty good?
Everything's all right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Right. So that video, it makes these points to the American society that, that they have to get out and vote, and without them, their system is not going to work because their voice needs to be heard, right? This is what they frame. And like you said, in the beginning of your intro, that, all these athletes, especially right now with the NBA playoffs going on, I'm sure you guys have seen, while they're sitting on the bench, their warm-up tees all have, the go vote or vote. This is their way of like protesting to some of the crisis that we've seen in our country lately. And really, to understand this, we have to understand that the idea of voting is really a fig leaf attempt to hide the capitalist system. And what I mean by that is to, disguise something that's even worse, right? And we know as Muslims that this capitalist system is something that completely contradicts Islam, right? And this system is something that has destroyed not just Muslims, but non-Muslims as well. Today in America, we see millions of people, being hurt from different aspects in different cultures in different parts of their societies, and it's because of this capitalist system. But what they do to cover it up is that they say, okay, if you want your voice to be heard, go ahead and vote. But really, at the end of the day, we know that their vote is not really doing much. They're given two options to pick between, and these two options, Democrat Party or the Republican Party, they already have their own set agendas from before. They might give you, a few policies that you might be attracted to in the beginning, but at the end of the day, they have their own agendas on what they want to do, what changes they want to bring, and what's really going to help these capitalists. These parties are funded by bigger organizations, for example, the NRA or bigger companies like Boeing. And we see, you know, when they get in trouble, big, like for example, when COVID initially came, when we were first hit with this crisis, and we saw that then it passed, you know, a $2 trillion bill for the COVID. This was not, you know, for the people really. I mean, some of it was, but essentially this was to protect the big businesses, the Wall Street businesses, Boeing and other such companies. And it was to save them. And it shows that this capitalist system, at the end of the day, you know, who it's always going to favor. And so to say that, you know, your vote is going to change what's going to happen, or if it really, you know, makes an impact, I would say, you know, just look at how much the oppressed communities have progressed in the past 100 or so years, and you would see very little. They've been, you know, they've only been offered one type of solution, and that's to go vote. And for them, you know, they don't have anything else. They don't have an alternative system like us, and we'll talk about this later, inshallah. But they're left with this last case scenario to go vote, and we see that, you know, for years and years, it's continued to fail them. I hope that can explain, you know, a little bit.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah, it does. I think now that we've talked about, you know, how does voting work, you know, what is a democracy, and does our vote actually count? I want to get into the Islamic perspective of it. You know, I want to address how Muslims should look at the issue of voting, because, you know, as Muslims, whatever we do in our life, however we approach a situation, however we kind of critique what's going on, we should be critiquing it through the Islamic lens, right? So before we do something, we have to ask ourselves, did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to do this? Did Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam do this? We have to ask ourselves these types of questions. So when it comes to voting, and an issue as big as voting, we need to ask ourselves these questions. So Hayyan, I just want to kind of follow up with you, and I want to ask you, you know, as this election is coming up on November 3rd, are we allowed as Muslims to go and vote for a specific candidate to enact laws on our behalf?
Right. And before I go into it, I just want to, you know, welcome the other speakers as well. Just chime in if you need to say anything pertaining to the topic. Just keep this very informal discussion. However, okay, so going back to your question, you know, the introduction that you just gave right now, it's really important that we have to, as Muslims, you know, look through the Islamic lens first. And this is a very important point that we always need to keep in our mind. Whether it's, in this case, voting or anything that we face in society and school, with our families, we need to understand that our first, you know, initial reaction should be, what does Islam say about this? Now, the act of voting itself, this is a halal action. This is allowed by Islam. And we've seen it in the past that, you know, some of the khulafas, they were chosen by this. When we talk about when Uthman bin Affan and Ali radiallahu anhu, what happened with them, that the, you know, the council that Umar ibn al-Khattab, he assigned, they went out to, you know, consider the opinions of the people, and they essentially, they voted who they thought would be a better candidate. So the idea of voting, this is allowed. Now, when it comes about what you are voting for, this is a really important concept to understand. In Islam, when you vote for someone, you give wakala to them, which means to, you know, you give authority to someone to act on your behalf. For example, if we take a step back, when we talk about, you know, people getting married, when a female, she wants to get married, she sends a mahram, her mahram, on her behalf to go and, you know, take the steps for marriage or whatnot to initiate that. And this means that the woman is giving her wakala to her mahram, right? Now, when we take this back to the idea of voting, the same principle applies. When in Islam we vote for someone, we give our wakala for the khalifa or the ruler to act on our behalf. So we have to see, what are they acting? Are they acting on Islam, or are they acting on kufr? And today in society, in America, in this election between Biden and Trump, of course they're ruling on kufr, right? Even Obama, Bernie, Hillary, anyone whoever it is, even if they're not as bad as Trump, if you want to say, or if they're nicer people, or if they can appeal to the people more, it doesn't matter. What they're ruling by is kufr. Their actions are haram, and we are giving our wakala to them, and this is not allowed, you know, to give wakala to someone who's going to commit haram on you. The next point that we have to, like,
can I ask one thing real quick, Hayyan? What would you say about, you know, rulers in the Muslim lands today?
Right. No, that's a great point to bring up. So a lot of times we think that, oh, what if I go to Pakistan or Jordan or some Muslim country where they claim to, like, for example, rule by Islam, or even though they might have their own constitution, they say it's an Islamic constitution, is voting in that, scenario acceptable? So we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, "Inil hukmu illa lillah," that the ruling, it only belongs to Allah Azza wa Jalla. He says it in Surah Yusuf. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And whosoever does not rule by Allah, by what Allah has revealed, they are the oppressors. So this makes it very clear that legislation, that ruling, it can only belong to Allah. Man cannot create law. This is forbidden. This is shirk, right? To think that you can create law, this is shirk. And in Pakistan, in Jordan, and all these Muslim countries, even though they call them, Islamic countries or whatnot, at the end of the day, they are still making their own laws, right? They have their parliament systems, and they vote on bills, they vote on laws, and they might have some Islamic laws, but at the same time, they also have, kufr laws as well. When we look at these countries that Hudayfa, you're mentioning, the Muslim countries, they're all tied in World Bank loans, in riba, and their whole economic system is built on, haram stuff that is forbidden. So if we're going to vote for these people in these elections where they are going to, create law, we are giving our wakala to them that you are allowed to create law. We approve of this. This is very forbidden in Islam, and I hope that was clear, Mutasim. If there's any more clarification needed, I'm more than happy to.
So just to clarify one point, when you talk about the word wakala, so does that mean, right, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're like giving someone the authority, or you're approving of someone to kind of take action on your behalf? Is that
exactly? Mm-hmm.
All right.
Right.
So let me just.
And in this case, like I said, it's man-made law, right? This is the point that we need to understand. It's not about what it could be. It could be like, for example, if Bernie Sanders was running for president or whatever, Biden, he says something good for the Muslims, right? He says, oh, we'll support, even though they don't support Palestine. Let's say they say we support Palestine, right? We know they're very openly Zionist, right? Especially Joe Biden. We've seen, his videos from the past. But let's say they do in some way support Islam, and we think this is what's best for us. No, at the end of the day, even if they support that, they're still on the other side creating laws which they think are better than the laws of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allah has created everything for us. He's created a system for us to live in, a perfect system, and that's the only system, that we should live by.
So let me just play devil's advocate here really quick, and I want to kind of point this to Hudayfa, is that, living in the West as Muslims, we're told a lot of the times that, we can't really control what's going on, and that we have to vote for the lesser of two evils, okay? This is what we're told a lot of times. And I want to just, take some time to watch this video really quick of two prominent shuyukh, very well known in the West, who defend this type of argument. Let's watch it. All right, let me just play the recording of it. You guys can hear it.
The discussion now is, if I vote for, say, Mr. Hussein Obama, or I vote for Romney, or anyone, like, then I'm not saying anything. Then that means I'm supporting some good and evil, and that the idea of supporting good and evil didn't exist kind of previous, especially in the time of the Khulafa. But you look at, like, for example, Sultan al-Ulama Yazid ibn Abdul Salam, Qawa'id al-Anam. He talks about the idea of supporting a Muslim leader who was fasiq and mu'min. He talks about the reality of at times having to support, and at that time was making bay'ah to a leader who might have been a fajr. His adala, his integrity might have been suspect, but at the same time he had the sulta. And he actually wrote about this. And he said that if there are two bad leaders, then the lesser evil becomes the good that the Muslims should support. And he talked about this, he wrote about this, and this is he was in the 6th century after the hijrah of the Prophet.
So right there is a clip, as you can see towards the end, he spoke about, as a Muslims, if we have two evils, we have to choose the lesser of the two evils, which is the better of two options. Hudayfa, what's the Islamic understanding on the issue of lesser of two evils?
Okay, I'll begin answering this by first reciting this hadith, which was narrated by Aisha radiallahu anha, and then I'll get into critiquing the statement that Sheikh Suhaib Webb just made. So Bismillah. Whenever Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given the choice of one of two matters, he would choose the easier of the two, as long as it was not sinful to do so. But if it was sinful to do so, he would not approach it. Now, with secularism kind of encompassing our entire lives from every single angle, we start to look at things, with this cost benefit, and this is really where this argument of lesser of two evils comes from. It's really not from Islam. Islam has one way of looking at things. Is a certain action haram, or is it halal? That is the only way Allah has allowed us to look at every action. Now, many scholars do actually agree that the act of voting or allowing someone to legislate on something, on a system, something other than what Allah has revealed is haram, but they match it to instances or the very certain times where Allah allows the believer to commit the haram action and not be held accounted for. Now, those certain instances are very, very specific, such where you only have only haram things to choose from, such as, let me give an example of what our brothers and sisters in China are going through right now. They're given the option to one, drink alcohol or be killed. In that very specific instance, Allah does allow you to choose the less evil option, or choose the haram option, but and still stay alive. Allah allows that. But looking at our situation here in the West, we're given the option to vote for candidate A, candidate B. That's how people look at it. But really, there's a third option, which is to not vote at all. So voting for candidate A would be a sin, as scholars do agree. Voting for candidate B would be a sin, and they see it as a lesser of two harams. But there's a third option, which I said is to not vote at all. So really, the lesser of two evils does support choosing the third option, which is to vote. Now, what Sheikh Suhaib Webb mentioned, that the scholar at the time allowed for the less evil sultan to be elected. Now, the problem with this is that system that the sultans are ruling by is still Islam. So they're still ruling by what Allah has revealed. Living in the West, if we vote for the less evil ruler, they're still ruling by something that's Allah has not revealed. They're still ruling by these man-made laws. So this argument this reality can't be related to what the shuyukh at the time with the sultans, when they were ruling by what Islam and what Allah has revealed. It can't really be matched. Let's look at where this argument lesser of two evils has gotten us in the past. Let's look in America. When Bill Clinton was ruling, he was looked at as a lesser of two evil politicians. And where did that get the people of America? Muslims. The Iraq sanctions that were placed. How many millions of children, almost 500,000 children were killed due to those sanctions. You go on to the next president, George W. Bush. There's a lot of Muslim support for that. But where did that get us? He was one of the worst war criminals known to mankind. But let's go on to the next candidate, President Barack Obama. He turned out to be the worst ruler for the Muslims. You look at all the past presidents. So Obama was the worst. The number of drone bombs he dropped on the Muslim countries was more than all other presidents combined. So where has this lesser of two evils really gotten the Muslims? If you look, all it's doing is we're having compromise on our deen, and it's giving us these little scraps here and there. That's not what we really need to do. We need to come together and not exhaust our energy in a system that's not from Islam, but rather come together as a ummah to establish something greater, something that is from Islam. Hopefully that helps kind of clarify this argument of lesser two evils and really why it's not getting the Muslims anywhere.
For sure, Jazakallah.
And I just wanted to add to Deifa's point. When he mentioned that what happened in Iraq, right? I believe it was the Secretary of the State of the Foreign, Minister of America. There's a video of her on YouTube. You guys can just look this up right now, and she admits that that the price, that it was worth it. The 500,000 Iraqi children that died because of the economic benefits that the capitalist system again that they would, gain, they say that it was worth it. And this, again, it's back to this point. This is what the lesser of two evils brings. This is what the capitalist system brings. Just wanted to add to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add another point as well. When he was talking about does your vote actually count? If you look at most of the issues in the United States, for example, like racial issues in the 60s, right? It only started gaining popularity within, the president, Lyndon B. Johnson, to push that bill because it gained momentum from people speaking out. It wasn't because they voted for a specific person or they went after a specific candidate. It started from them talking and actually making a push for the government to actually make a change. And it seems like as far as in the system, if you can get voters to vote for you, you're going to go ahead and do what they want. And that's the only real way to even make even a little change within the system.
For sure. Jazakallah khair. So just to recap of what we've talked through so far, we've talked about what is democracy, how does voting work. We've talked about does your vote count? We've talked about the halal and harams. Is voting halal or haram? We've talked about the lesser of two evils, which what's it called? Hudayfa just mentioned right now. We've talked about, yes, I believe that's all we talked about, right? So I mean, yeah. So just to, I want to play off of that question of the lesser of two evils, and it's probably something that a lot of people have been wondering while Hudayfa was talking. Hudayfa, you mentioned that we have three options. Option A is to vote for candidate A. Option B, vote for candidate B, or option C is to not vote. And how, like I mentioned before, about how we're hearing a lot about go vote, go vote, go vote. We've also been hearing that if you don't go vote, then don't complain. You know what I'm saying? Because voting equals to inaction. That's what we've been hearing a lot of the times, right? So, Hayyan, I want to ask you this question: does abstaining from voting actually equate to inaction? So, is it right to say that when we don't vote for a specific party or for a specific candidate, us Muslims are affected by that?
Right, we're taking the side of the oppressor, basically. That's what they say, right? And another thing I was going to say is that a lot of the scholars, they've started to say that we have to vote in these elections. The imams in our Muslims, that they're saying it's mandatory, it's fard to vote at this point. So it's a very, if this subject is being, pushed down the Muslim minds, the Muslim communities and the Muslim youth, right? They're being put on their heads. It's being shoved down to them that you have to go do this. And they're not giving any justifications, any dalils, any of the history of the Islamic Ummah, how the Islamic Ummah, dealt with, or how they got to change, how Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, how he is the best example of change and how he achieved change. They don't talk about this. So one thing I want to mention when I talked about, the modern scholars and the imams and what they've been saying about voting being obligatory. So I want to encourage our listeners, don't always blindly believe, what you hear, right? You have to always make sure, confirm, try, especially, in a subject like this, try to, because it's such an important, like I said, this action, it can be considered as shirk, so it has to be something you have to look into. And an example of this is when Umar radiallahu anhu, and this is an example I think Marcus told me about, when Umar radiallahu anhu, he was trying to put a limit on the mahd, right? And one of the women who was just sitting there in front of him or whatever it was, she said that, no, you can't do this. You can't do this. Rasulullah never put a limit on this, so you can't do this. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he understood that he was wrong, and he's like, okay, you're right, I'm wrong. And that wasn't forcefully pushed down them. And Umar radiallahu anhu is one of the greatest scholars, one of the greatest Muslims that we have, in our Islamic history. So even if he can even be wrong, then what's to say that the scholars today cannot be mistaken, right? So always just try to go back, try to see what the Qur'an and the Sunnah say before you come to any conclusion. And alhamdulillah, the brothers here, we're trying to justify everything, by giving context and by providing, and by breaking down the reality to understand that as best as we can, and at the same time justifying it with the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, you said, does inaction, or does not voting equate to inaction? For this, first of all, even if it is in this sense an inaction of voting, not voting, inaction of voting, if we have established already that voting is haram, then we are actually being rewarded by Allah Azza wa Jal from abstaining from something haram, right? So there is reward in staying away from an action, right? And there's a hadith that mentioned, we can link this, in the video later, but that's number one thing we want to establish here. The second thing is, of course, we as Muslims, we are hurt by, everything that goes on. We are hurt by what happens to the Hispanic communities, to the Black communities. We're hurt by, what's happening to the Muslim youth in America, right? Or not even in America, outside in the Muslim world, where Muslims are being oppressed. We want to bring a change, right? It bothers everyone in Syria and Pakistan and Kashmir. All of us, it haunts us at night, and it pains us that we can't stand this oppression, and we want to bring a change. I know that every person that does vote, at the end of the day, he does want to see change, right? No one is just voting to vote. You want to see change. I want to see change. We all want to see change, right? Now we have to see, as Muslims, who is our best example to see change? I mentioned this, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is our best example. If we want to achieve something, we should see how the best man ever to live, how did he achieve this, right? We follow his sunnah in this, that. Why don't we follow his sunnah in how to achieve change? How to achieve justice for the oppressed? Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam in Mecca, when he was giving da'wah in Mecca, right? We have Darul Nadwa, which is basically the parliament system of Quraysh, right? This is where the rulers would decide what goes on, what doesn't happen, what laws are created by man. We can compare this to the American Congress or whatever, right? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he did not participate in this process. He did not go to Darul Nadwa and start take a position with Abu Sufyan and Abu Jahl and all these people that he was offered. They offered him so much. They offered him money. They offered him the best women that they had. They offered him, they said, 1 year we'll live by your rule and 1 year let's live by our rule. They offered him all sorts of things, but he did not compromise. He had a mission of establishing Islam, which is not bound to anything else, and Islam that Allah Azza wa Jal, he revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, an independent state. This is the action that he took. So he did countless years of da'wah, he put countless efforts of da'wah in Mecca, and he was rejected. For years he was rejected. We know how hard of a life he lived in Mecca. They were boycotted. His wife died. His uncle, who was his protector, he died. When he went to die, he was treated so brutally. He came back, with soaking in blood, right? This is the hardships that he went through. We're not even close to any of those hardships, and we're still not following his example. His example teaches us that we need to stick to Islam 100%. We need to stand up to these corrupt rulers. We can't participate in their systems, but we stand up to their corruption. We speak out on it, and we offer an alternative system in Islam. This is what Rasulullah did. And in Medina, he was granted the nusrah for this, right? This is what we should also try for. We should do da'wah as much as we can, and we should try to seek the nusrah in the Muslim land. And inshallah, when we receive this, we will be once again victorious. This is the only there's the only way of change, only way we can achieve change. The only way Rasulullah achieved change, this is the only way we can. And we have countless hadiths that promise us this. Allah tells us that victory is near. Allah tells us that in another hadith that the ruling, that we start on the method of the Khulafa Rashidun, and then there will be an oppressive rule and whatnot. And at the end, he finished it, and then there will be another khilaf on the method of the prophethood, right? So this is the change that we need to strive for. This is the change and justice that can only, protect humanity, can only serve them justice. And it's because it's from Allah Azza wa Jal. He knows us best, right? Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, they don't know us as best as we can. We're all limited humans, but Allah, who is our Lord and Creator, the one who has established us on this earth, the one who has given us Jannah, or who will inshallah give us Jannah, he is the only one that can provide a perfect system for us to live in. And that's one thing we should try for, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Hayyan. Very well said. Very well said. And before we wrap this podcast up, we're running out of time. Brother Abdullah, if you have any closing remarks and kind of wrap this thing up, we very much appreciate it.
Jazakallah khair, brothers, for describing the current system of voting. And just to summarize what Brother Hudayfa described, that current system calls itself a democratic system, but we see that the current system vastly benefits a small minority of the population. Just looking at it from a fundamental perspective. For example, during the pandemic, we saw trillions of dollars were handed to corporations and economic elite gained billions, while the vast majority were hoping for breadcrumbs, and they didn't know if they would make it from month to month. The democratic system boasts itself, and it boasts the rule of the majority. But as described by the brother, the electoral college is the one that holds the power in the voting process. Another point, just to summarize, was the lesser of two evils argument and darura. In summary, the Islamic view of the lesser of two evils is that if life is on the line, a prohibited action can be taken and is even encouraged. In instances of life and death, the preservation of life is the most important thing, and it's an obligation to preserve it. For example, we know the Muslims in China, they're forced to drink alcohol. They're forced to drink alcohol, and if they don't, they will be tortured and maybe even killed. Jazakallah khair for brothers for clearing up these common ideas that are, often overlooked and they're often talked about. Now, as viewers, what should we walk away from? There are a couple of main ideas we should walk away with. One is the concept of wakala. In Islam, wakala is where you delegate someone on your behalf. When it comes to voting, it is a form of wakala where you delegate someone on your behalf to legislate. What this means is that what legislation means is the person will decide what is right and what is wrong, what is permissible, what is impermissible, what we should follow, and where we should take our rulings from. In the current system, we vote for people to ideally represent the majority and then create laws that can benefit them. But in Islam, legislation is described very differently. Brother Hayan mentioned in Ayah and Surah Yusuf. And just to give a context of the story of Yusuf alayhi Islam, we know that he was falsely imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. In prison, he meets two companions that come to him to interpret their dreams. And in prison, he also gives them dawah, and he describes to them the deen of Allah. He says, Surah 12, verse 39, O my two companions of prison, are separate lords better, or Allah, the one, the prevailing? And then, what does this mean exactly? Separate lords or the one? Now, he continues to describe what it means to believe in separate lords, and really what it means to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, you worship not besides him except mere names you have named them, you and your fathers, for which Allah has sent down no authority. The legislation is not but for Allah. He has commanded that you worship not except him. That is the correct religion, but most of the people do not know. He mentions, to the companions in prison, Inal hukmu illa lillah. Inal hukmu illa lillah. They follow and worship other than Allah. They take them as lords who have no authority over them. But Yusuf describes that legislation is not but for Allah. It is not, legislation doesn't come from our minds. It doesn't come from people that are in our room. Where we take halal and haram from isn't from our own minds. Forget someone else's. Where we take our rulings from, whether it be the economics, to even how we interact with one another, even the fundamental values we carry and the moral and manners which we carry them, is from Allah and exemplified by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Qur'an and the Sunnah. As Muslims, when we elect a leader, we elect him to legislate. We elect him to rule by what Allah has revealed. That is the foundation. That is the basis. We know that when a leader is selected, he will take rulings from the Quran and from the Sunnah. When people legislate, however, like in all man-made systems, whether it be democracy or socialism, whether they are in a minority, majority, all or a few, or even just one person, they'll look out for their own self-interest at the end of the day, not the self-interest of of the majority, not the self-interest of even animals. We see that the mercy comes from following the Quran and the Sunnah and taking rulings from the Quran and Sunnah. And even if they don't look at their own self-interest, they don't have as we're limited. Our minds are limited. Man doesn't have knowledge to make laws just for all and for all times and all places. Things change and people don't know what the repercussions are. Hence, that's why man-made laws are always prone to error and injustice. But we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laws are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect. We understand in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, he's falsely imprisoned for several years and in darkness and hunger and thirst. His life is on the line, and he mentions this very important point that Sovereignty belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's where we can get our rulings of halal, haram, and it's where we take our rulings from for the hukam. Jazakallah khair for everyone on this podcast. I think it was really beneficial. Inshallah, we can all benefit from this. Assalamu alaikum.
I just want to add another point about this one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, well, Abdullah's talking, mashallah, he killed it right there, and it recalled me of another thing is that, kind of going back to my question about inaction, action, what the Prophet did, right? Sometimes we as Muslims, we're told, to compromise, right? To just give up a little bit and we'll have some benefit here, right? We have some maslaha here, right? So our only maslaha is Islam, right? It has to be halal and haram. If it's halal, that this is the maslaha for us, right? And the halal, then we can have different maslaha, right? Anyways, the point I want to get across is that when the Prophet ﷺ, before he got Medina, right? Before he got the Ansar, right? He was out going to countless other tribes, trying to establish Islam there as well, right? He had this mission, like I said, this was his action, not going to the Quraysh system, but his action was to establish Islam, and he was going to many tribes. And some of the things he heard from those tribes were, they would say that, okay, we'll give you authority, but we're not going to fight the Persians. And the Prophet said, no, I'm not going to settle for this, right? I want 100% Islam, right? I'm not going to be bound by anything. And he didn't settle for this. Just one simple treaty. And today Muslims say, oh, let's compromise on this, at least we get this. Let's compromise on this, at least we get this. That's not the way the Prophet thought. Another example of the same thing is when they said that after you die, the Prophet said, after you die, we want the authority back, we want the rulership back. Again, the Prophet denied. And there's many other instances, but the key point here is that he didn't settle, he didn't compromise. In those years, you could have thought he's been trying so hard, he's been rejected for years and years and years. It's the same thing over and over again. Prophet could have thought, okay, let me just at least try to establish Islam here. Maybe they'll get convinced later on. Let me be nice to them right now. Maybe if they see, how humble of how nice of a person I am, maybe in 5 years they'll settle, or they'll give me complete authority. Or they'll be willing to fight the Persian Empire. But he didn't. He wanted complete Islam.
Jazakallah khair. I think everybody mentioned a lot of good points. I'm sorry to say I wish we could continue this discussion, but we are running a little bit low on time. I want to thank everybody for making it. We're recording this right now really late at night, so I want to thank everybody for taking some time out of their sleep to record this. Jazakallah khair, guys. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us all guidance, to forgive us all, to guide us on the straight path, and to bless discussions like these. We hope that good can come from it.
Ameen.
And until next time,
Ameen.
Until next time, I think that's it. Anybody else have anything to say? Nothing? All right. I will end it over here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.